Hello, everyone. On behalf of the LAM Foundation, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's Lamposium in Your Living Rooms Circle of Hope webinar. I've had fun recognizing and talking with familiar faces in the crowd and see many new faces as well. I'm so glad you all could join us. We have an informative and full agenda for you this evening. Now, before we get started, I would like to take a moment to recognize and thank our generous sponsor, the National Disease Research Interchange, or NDRI. NDRI's partnership with the LAM Foundation, with LAM researchers, and LAM patients has pushed forward the science of LAM through procurement of tissue at the time of transplant. We appreciate their ongoing support in our research efforts and our educational programs. My name is Cindy Beasley, and I am the Director of Education and Advocacy for the LAM Foundation, and I will be your moderator this evening. In addition, Lisa Pascal, a 10-year post-transplant recipient and the coordinator of our Circle of Hope Transplant Support Program, will be joining us after Mr. Shad's presentation to share with us about the Circle of Hope and to lead our group discussion. I encourage you to stay logged on for this group session so that you can connect with fellow LAM community members from around the globe. So just a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, the microphones will be muted, and I hope that you all will keep to that so we don't have any interruptions there, and the chat box disabled throughout Mr. Shad's presentation. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will open the chat box for questions. Also, we are recording the presentation portions of this evening's session. Now, if you don't want to be visible on the recording, please go ahead and take a minute now to turn off your camera. Of note is that we will not be recording the group discussions. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker to you this evening. Mr. Shad has been with the NDRI since 2007 and serves as the Director of Tissue Source Site Management. He has comprehensive research recovery operations experience and expertise in all aspects of facilitating the recovery of human tissue for research. He oversees all activities related to the management of tissue source sites, which includes a vast network of organ procurement organizations, tissue banks, eye banks, hospital systems, and other tissue recovery professionals. He is also responsible for NDRI's private donor recovery program, which aims to enroll individuals with rare diseases like LAM into various donation programs. Mr. Shad, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I will now turn this over to you.
All right, let me get my screen shared. Thank you for that introduction. I like you said, I've been with NDRI now close to 17 years, and I will say probably for 13 of those I've been involved with the LAM Foundation, so very familiar with the work the foundation does, the generosity of the patients and the donors and all the work that the doctors and surgeons do. It's stories like what's going on at the LAM Foundation that make, doing what we do possible or even worthwhile, waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and things like that. It's all for a good cause, it just makes you feel good. But I'm here today to talk about LAM's tissue donation program. Basically the who, what, when, why, and how. I'm going to start off with just a history and overview of NDRI for those of you who might not have heard of us before. We are the National Disease Research Interchange, NDRI for short. We were founded in 1980 as the National Diabetes Research Interchange. Our founder was one of the co-founders of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and through that, the need for human pancreata emerged, and she went to the NIH and secured funding to start NDRI. And since then, obviously, we've expanded to additional disease groups to work with. We are a 501c3 not-for-profit. We've been funded by the National Institutes of Health for over 35 years now. Every year, we provide thousands of biospecimens to researchers globally. And then of those, typically around 200 publications a year cite NDRI as a source for their tissue. All of those publications we do put on our website in the for researcher section, where you can search by tissue, you know, area of study, the year that the study was published. I'll show you a couple of examples at the end of my presentation of items you might find on there. Our mission is simple. It's to provide human biospecimens worldwide to advance biomedical, bioscience research and development and education in the life sciences. That's all we do. We do research. We are governed by a board of directors. Here's a list of those. What we try to do is make sure that we have personnel and, you know, really directors on the board that oversee a bunch of different areas of what we do. You know, from, you know, OPOs to researchers. You can see Dr. Krimskaya, who works at the University of Pennsylvania, is the scientific director of the LAM Foundation. It's on our board as well. We've had a long-standing relationship with her. So we have some finance and audit people on there for our finance and audit committee. But, you know, we meet with the board twice a year. They go over all of our, you know, all of our financials, all the work that we're doing. It's a good group of people, a lot of engagement. Like I said, we are funded by the National Institutes of Health for over 35 years, specifically for the placement of human tissues and organs for academic and NIH researchers. We do work with for-profit companies as well, but I'll get into that in a little bit. But from the NIH, the program that it funds is called the Human Tissue and Organ Research Resource. It's funded by the Office of the Director, and that little round table there with the little groups are the different organizations that fund that main grant. Of most importance to LAM patients is going to be on the bottom in orange, which is NHLBI, which is the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Again, our additional sources of funding, we do work with some pharma biotech companies, you know, a lot of cross-reactivity studies, drug screening. The goal there being to test and screen on human tissue versus animal tissue. So this way you get a one-to-one comparison of what effect certain medications and drugs might have on those tissues. We also work on special initiatives. We have special funding from the NIH for programs like you know, Alzheimer's and HIV research. We have some other non-NIH federal funding, typically from like the CDC for a specific project with you know, patients with ALS that they've been following for a while, patient advocacy groups like the LAM Foundation, and then government contractors who basically work on contracts for the government. They manage those contracts for the government. We typically partner with them to provide tissues for research. The types of tissue requests we get, we have standard tissue requests that we work on. Eye tissue, solid organs are the organs that, you know, we would typically be transplanting, like heart, lung, liver, pancreas. Those tissues are handled by organ procurement organizations. Tissue bank biospecimens. Tissue banks are typically doing recovery for bone, vascular tissue, and skin for grafts. You know, for that type of transplant. And then we also do work with some hospital sites to get basically clinical discard samples. You know, once pathology has sampled a cancer sample, for example, you know, the leftover sample that they have, rather than disposing it, we're able to place it with researchers who are studying different types of cancers. You know, cartilage from patients who are getting knee replacements for osteoarthritis to study the effect of osteoarthritis on cartilage in the knees. So things like that, we're able to work with some hospitals. We also work on customizable projects. There's, you know, if you go to our website and look at some of the different programs that we work on, these are the ones where, you know, we're not just waiting for a donor to appear. This is where we have to set up a specific target OPO to go after, have them screen for us. You know, we'll include a new authorization that's very project specific. includes providing the investigator with enhanced donor data, like specifically on diseases, and disease treatment. And then we develop specific recovery protocols that are outside of the normal recovery for these programs. I'm going to go into a little bit of our operations team. We are a 24/7 group that works at NDRI. Tissue source site management is basically our sourcing group for our operations. Scientific services is the group that's going to speak to all the investigators, who are looking for tissue. So they go through a feasibility process where NDRI's operations group will look at all the requests. We'll see whether or not it's something that we could potentially recover for that investigator. And then they'll go through a whole application process. We have an external research feasibility review that occurs as well on these projects. And then they go through the scientific services team to develop those protocols. And these protocols are what we send to the recovery team to let them know exactly what the researcher is looking for and how it needs to be prepared for their research study. The tissue source site management team, that's myself, Pauline, and Wakita, who are on the Zoom call as well. Just different groups we work with. I think Cindy covered most of these, but organ procurement organizations, they're federally designated to vet donors for transplant. So if, for example, any of you have received a transplant or waiting for a transplant, an OPO will be involved in that transplant. Tissue banks, like I said, there's just different organizations that recover transplant tissue. NDRI itself is a non-transplant anatomic donation program. So anything we do doesn't go for transplant, it goes for research. We do have a license from the New York State Department of Health as a non-transplant anatomic donation organization. We work with hospitals, like I said, eye banks. So eye banks typically recover cornea for corneal transplant. That allows us to screen diseased donors because diseased corneas won't go for transplant. So this way they can recover those for research. Transplant centers, we'll work with them to recover, in this case, diseased lamb lungs to provide to investigators. And then contract recovery specialists, this is part of our private donor program, where we have individuals all across the country that are available and ready to do a recovery at any point, for different tissue types, different projects based on their training. Our fulfillment group is the 24/7 call group. They are always in office, available to take calls and screen donors. On off hours, they're the team that gets the information for our group to notify when we're not in the office. Basically, what they do is they do the intake of the donor information, authorization and recovery timing. This way they can properly screen against what the family's wishes are and the training of the site that's recovering the tissue against the research protocols. They match all of that. They request the recovery. Post the recovery, they coordinate all the shipping to the researchers, and then they work on our case closure for those donor cases. For our logistics management, we have a small biorepository where we store samples that investigators want us to hold for them. Like, let's say they're getting frozen samples, and the frozen samples are going to Canada. We'll batch like 10 samples for them and send all of those together. So we have a CAP accredited biorepository. We have a couple of new projects from the NIH that will help us expand that and will be more of a biorepository rather than a short-term storage facility. But for certain rare diseases, we do keep samples on hand for investigators that do come in and need samples like frozen lung or even fixed lung. So let's get into the LAM donor program. That's just a quick overview of NDRI. We do also have a marketing team, finance team, IT team, but they aren't involved in the donation process. That's our operations group. Excuse me. So the LAM tissue collection program, so it's a collaborative initiative of the LAM Foundation and NDRI. We collect surgical tissue samples and detailed information from LAM patients to accelerate research efforts related to LAM. Typically, they're made available to approved LAM researchers, providing them with much needed resources in furthering the effort to cure LAM. A lot of LAM patients, I have a study that I will highlight later that's looking at the efficacy of sirolimus and then combination therapies. But if it wasn't for donations from patients like yourselves, sirolimus might not have ever been even developed, right? So there's a real connection from what you all are able to do and how that can help future generations, right? So people that, I was talking to 4 years ago on the webinar, they've helped with advances that, you know, patients are now benefiting from, right? So it's a good program. It's something that, is helping us all move forward. The donation process, we try to make this as simple as possible, but to remind you, most of the things that we do require are required by law. We have to make sure that we abide by all the local and state rules, institutional rules that are provided by hospitals before we can place any tissue for research. We take care of all of that on our end, coordinating all of that, so you don't have to worry about it. But the need for certain information or certain documents is because of those requirements. So patients, family, or a healthcare team makes a referral to NDRI, right? So individuals can donate tissue for surgical procedures, tumors, diseased organs, lung from transplant surgery. NDRI obtains the consent and medical social history. Basically, I'll go over the document in detail here, in this presentation, but it provides us with the necessary signatures that, allow us to do what we do. Once you're having the surgery, or you're listed, or you're getting called in for the surgery, you notify NDRI, and we will then activate a donation plan that we set up and have everything ready ahead of time to make sure that everything is smooth as possible on the day of the surgery. We do have on our website, and you'll see a link to this on the side from the LAM page as well, but it's an FAQ. It's a downloadable PDF that's a lot of more information about the donation process at NDRI. It goes through both postmortem and surgical. We're concentrating on surgical donation because that's the current need for LAM investigators. So I highlighted this, but it is a good document to read that gives you an idea of the different requirements for the or different questions that we could answer. So becoming a donor, basically notifying NDRI, you can go to https://ndriresource.org/the LAM Foundation. We have a HIPAA compliant contact form on the webpage. Once you submit that, my team gets notified immediately that a submission has come in, and then based on what your preferred contact method is, we reach out to you to start the process, getting you information, getting you the paperwork that you need, and working through the process with you all. Documents needed for donation. These are the main things that we need on our end. There's additional documents that you can provide, like if you've had any testing done that an investigator might have interest in, medical records that, we could include, in the donor packet, that we can take as well. But these are the minimum requirement of documents that we need to proceed with donation. So you have an NDRI consent for research use of tissue, a premortem general questionnaire, and a LAM questionnaire. So the premortem questionnaire and the LAM questionnaire are basically like filling out your health history when you go to a doctor. When you're going to a doctor for the first time and they want to know about your history, that's basically what that form is. And the LAM questionnaire focuses more on the diagnosis of LAM, the treatment of LAM, and everything that investigators need to know about your disease progression. The documents can be completed on your own and submitted to NDRI via email, fax, or traditional mail. We can even send you the documents, paper documents, with a return envelope to send back. We could also complete these documents on the phone on a recorded line with an NDRI staff member. So we would then read the authorization to you. You would repeat certain statements, I, and then your name. But that would all be recorded, and then we would send you a transcription of that on the actual documents for your records. So our standard consent covers many different things. I'll cover each of these. This is just a little diagram. Access to the complete health record. Our protocol is reviewed and approved by the University of Pennsylvania IRB on a yearly basis. They basically govern what we do, as far as it goes to providing tissue for research. So the consent itself is a 2-page document. The beginning of the form is basically just an introduction to NDRI, a lot shorter than the one I gave you all. Naming yourself as the person. So I, like I said, hereby make a gift to the National Disease Research Interchange of biospecimens for research. Then there's a section for additional tissues to be authorized. For example, if investigators need blood, we would write blood in as an additional tissue to the lung that's being, transplanted. And then if you have any limitations, our system allows us to make sure that, if you say, hey, I don't want any of my tissues going to any corporate researchers or for-profit researchers, if you put that in here, we can screen that out and make sure that your wishes are granted. We have individuals sometimes who say they don't want to send tissue internationally. We do that as well. We can make sure that we don't ship any tissues going international. So if you have any restrictions, typically patients don't, but we just try to make sure that you do have the option to limit where your tissues go as well. So then it starts with basically what is the meat of the document, is the information that you have to understand and know. It includes acknowledgments of understanding of donation facts, right? That the tissues are a gift with no financial benefit. This is basically to make sure that that this is a voluntary, it's a voluntary thing for you to donate tissue. It's not required, right? We're not trying to coax you into donating. It's basically for that reason. There is no financial benefit, is to make sure that that this is out of the, there's basically, we're not trying to get you to sign up for something. It's completely on your own. It goes into that the recovery will be coordinated by NDRI. It talks about having access to medical records, which you might provide. Secure and storage of patient data and information. All of NDRI's systems are compliant with transplant organizations. We don't have requirements on ourselves, but we put that requirement on ourselves, specifically for going after licensure from New York State as a non-transplant anatomic donation organization. Everything's HIPAA compliant. All the information we send to investigators never will include patient name, date of birth, or address, only clinical data and information. That in certain circumstances, that when blood is collected, it would be used to determine eligibility for studies with infectious diseases. Genetic research disclosure and potential for loss of identity. So this is something that has become more needed in documents, with the increase of, ancestry tests and, 23andMe. So those groups have actually created these online data biorepositories that, potentially one day, let's say that, someone who's distantly related to you, the FBI comes up in an FBI search, right? Like that would be, they'd be able to connect to the 23andMe website. Typically that's the only way you would lose identity, but we make sure we include that in here, that there is, although very small, a possibility that, identification can be disclosed. And then cell line development for continued future use. This is typically where you have, an investigator will create, or propagate a cell to, have it continue to grow so they can continue to test over a certain amount of time, right? So this is for continued future testing. We need to include that disclosure because the end researcher might be able to do that with the cells. It would only be for the intended use, though. Everything that NDRI does and the agreements that the researcher signed with NDRI is that tissues can only be used for the intended use that they notify of us. So to continue the acknowledgments and understanding of donation facts, unknown future use, this covers whether or not, like if we have frozen tissue or fixed tissue that, if let's say that the researcher was doing genomic studies before, they might be able to do some pathological studies later on. If let's say, Dr. Gupta comes out with a paper that reveals something, they might want to go back and look at the tissue that they already have for what Dr. Gupta's paper is talking about. Research data sharing through databases. This is typically where if NDRI has our database with the information and we have a secure API connected to University of Pennsylvania's EMR to get information to them. So this covers that. The disposable unused tissue, we only place tissue that has use. Once a researcher is done, if there's any additional tissue left over, they might dispose of it. So this covers that. And then NDRI is responsible for the cost of any post-surgical sampling and placement. So any of the costs associated with, having the tissue processed at the hospital, sent out to investigators, NDRI covers all of that, and none of that is your responsibility. And then the last thing on here is a right to withdraw. The right to withdraw covers, let's say in the future, you decide, I no longer want to be a part of this. I want to remove my tissues. Basically, what this statement covers is that you can contact NDRI for us to start that process of retrieving samples back from investigators that they've been distributed to. But if the samples have already been used for some studies, any used samples can't be withdrawn. Then there's two small yes or no acknowledgements, whether or not we can release the contact information to the patient advocacy group, in this instance, the LAM Foundation. And then a consent, yes or no, to contact NDRI for informational purposes. And then it's just the acknowledgement and understanding of signatures. On the left-hand side, you'll have the donor signature and name and address information. On the right side, the first two lines are going to be for the signature and name of a witness if necessary. And then an NDRI staff member signs on the bottom right there to acknowledge that we've received the authorization and it's filled out completely, or to sign off that, we are the witness / person that recorded the authorization. The questionnaires, basically they provide, NDRI and approved researchers with the information they need for their studies. Investigators, like I'll show an example later, where they can actually go back and look at patient data and then use that to create predictive models on how a patient might progress based on how their disease is progressing. So after registration, NDRI provides you with a unique registration ID. It's going to be a PD number, private donor number. You should inform your loved ones of your intention to donate and keep a copy of your consent paperwork in a safe place. This way, if you ever need it, you have it. Provide NDRI with any updates to your information. So, once you're signed up, you can, if you move, for example, let NDRI know what your updated address is, if your phone number changes, things like that. Let's say you had another surgery and you need to update your records, you can contact NDRI to get that updated as well in our records. Um, Let NDRI know of any information about your procedure, where it's going to happen, the surgical team, contact the surgical team if you know that, and then the date and time of the procedure if that's already scheduled. This helps us know how fast we need to get things in place. If someone is registering and they're not even talking about being listed yet, that gives us a lot of time to collect the information and get everything ready. Versus someone who's just being listed, we have to make sure that the institutional releases are done, authorization consent paperwork is done, that all the kits are sent out for the investigators, and the investigators know that tissue might be possible. You want to notify your surgical team about your intention to donate and provide them with your registration paperwork. This allows the team themselves to get everything started on their end as far as what's needed by their institution. Like every institution is different, working with Columbia University in New York and getting tissue out is a lot easier than working with Duke and getting tissue out of Duke, right? So it requires a little more time when we're working with someone like Duke. So for stuff like that, as soon as you have the information, if you want to let us know, we start working on it right away. So then we also coordinate with the surgical team to make sure that the paperwork and the necessary supplies to process the tissue samples are there prior to your surgery. So when to register? If you're interested in donating for it, the answer is always now. You can register anytime, or as soon as you put your information into the form. Like I said, our team gets the email. Typically the next business day we'll reach out to you unless it's something urgent. You can call our 800 number and they'll reach out to us if it's after hours. On the private donor team, we do take calls 24/7. Myself, Pauline, and Wakita rotate on different nights, and our fulfillment staff knows who's on call, which is why the call has to go there first. You can, again, the website is ndiresource.org/the LAM Foundation. You can submit the form on there. And then if you have any questions during the process, contact our private donor team. We're always available. We can walk you through the process. We can, walk you through the forms, whatever you need to do to help you, we can. And you don't need to wait until you have your surgery plan to register to donate. And if you registered as a donor, you have less preparation to do than, just letting NDRI know when your upcoming surgery is, right? So if you do that early, then later on, it's really just concentrating on the surgery and concentrating on healing, really. If you intend to donate, get it out of the way, and this way you just concentrate on yourself. Leading up to the surgery, on the day of the surgery, you want to notify NDRI of your surgery time. We'll reach out to establish contacts and start execution of the donation plan that we've set up with the hospital. We'll notify the investigators of the potential tissue recovery, and then they'll let us know in real time their need of tissue samples. Dr. McCormick might say, hey, I need these 2 samples, but this last one, that study's ended. I no longer need that, right? So this way we're not sending them tissue that they're not going to use. So we're able to customize each request for the investigators in real time. So then we'll send the investigators a list that includes all the instructions that our scientific services team will set up with the investigators. And that outlines exactly what they need for their project. And then the tissue samples are shipped to the investigators by the NDRI team to their individual labs. That's pretty much the private donation process. Again, if you have any questions, we have a question session after this. And then, I have a couple of areas where our information is provided. And Cindy, I think you can share our information as well on how to contact NDRI. But Dr. Vera Krimskaya, who I've worked with for, 15 plus years now, she's a professor of medicine and at the Lung Biology Institute at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. She is the new LAM Foundation scientific director and a member of NDRI's board. But this study basically, what Vera and her team are showing here that there's two different laboratories here. You have rare lung disease at the University of Pennsylvania, um, and the Department of Pharmaceutical Biotechnology at University of Pécs in Hungary. And the goal of the study was to demonstrate that treatment of human LAM cells with lower doses of rapamycin, which is already approved, and a drug candidate, proxazine, can result in cell death of the cells that they're trying to get rid of, right? So it's important because here you're looking at a combination therapy that inhibits two different cellular pathways to help treat LAM, right? So it's basically, there's not one way to treat a disease in most cases. There's different pathways that are changing. And it's usually finding these. We've worked with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and we did a study with them where we were getting explant lungs from patients with cystic fibrosis. And one of the coolest things, like we sent them almost 400 patient lungs over 10 years, and they developed a drug, which, was great, but it only helped 16% of the population with cystic fibrosis, right? Huge step. First treatment to help patients live a normal life with cystic fibrosis. But it only helped 16%. But it was great because that led to additional therapies. And now they're up to a point where I think the number is somewhere between 92 and 94% of patients with cystic fibrosis can now be treated, right? And this is only in 6 years since that first, release. So, work like this that Dr. Krupskaya is doing is because of patients, like you all, and it's because of studies that they're doing to treat in the future, right? This could even benefit individuals that are donating studies like this, right? So that's the real point to hit when it comes to research donation that makes me happy. Just a couple more examples from investigators that I think I spoke about this first one here on the left. That's Dr. Nishant Gupta's paper. Basically, what he did is him and a group went back and looked at all the data that is stored at the NIH, all the tissue samples that are stored at the NIH from previous LAM patients. That's in the tissue repository for LAM. And they were basically able to create a predictive model to estimate the risk of lung function decline, over 5 years, to help patients to see, all right, this patient needs treatment quicker than this one, or a different treatment path than this patient does, right? So these are things that researchers, investigators, are able to take directly to the bedside, right? One of the things that we hear a lot in science meetings is bench to bedside, right? What does that mean? That's going from the research bench, the laboratory bench, to the people that actually need it, and that's the patients, right? So work like this is showing you bench to bedside, right? We're getting to the bedside now where we can actually tailor treatment for patients based on their symptoms, not just a diagnosis. The other group here is also a collaborative group. Dr. Gupta's on there. We have, Dr. Kopris from Dr. McCormick's lab. Basically, the genetic basis of LAM is known, but how the disease progresses is still not known, right? So we're still trying to figure that out. So they use new technologies, and this kind of goes back to what I said about earlier about unknown future uses, right? These are new technologies that didn't exist, 2 years ago, that they're able to use now, and they constructed what they call a regulatory network to control the transcription of LAM cells, right? So transcription is basically, what it is in a courtroom. It's your body telling these, transcriptomes what to tell proteins to make, what to tell how to build this protein, right? So if that, script, that transcription is wrong, that's when you start, disease progression, right? That's when things are switched differently, where this cell is now not functioning normal because that script was wrong, right? So that's basically what they're trying to do here. So they basically identified the activation of a uterine-specific HOX PDX I have no idea what those letters stand for, but it is a transcriptional program in pulmonary LAM cells. And basically, now they have a new target to study to see, all right, if we can stop, you know, this from being wrong here, we might not even get to that point, right? So this is stopping it earlier on. This is finding the actual source of what's going on in the cells. Um, a lot of the studies, like that you might see presented at the group meeting that the LAM Foundation puts together, where the investigators present their studies. A lot of them are talking about single cell RNA analysis. They're talking about um, the way that cells are spatially constructed, right? You have, a lung cell, but it's not just a lung cell. There's other things within that lung cell. How is this one component of a cell talking to this component of a cell? Is that where the issue is happening, right? So now they're able to go deeper and find out exactly where errors are occurring within the biological processes to say this is where the disease is starting. So studies like this are really exciting. These are just two examples that we have on our website in our publication search. But I know, the LAM Foundation definitely has a resource of, investigator stories, investigator projects that, are available if you want to learn more. Well, I just want to say thank you to the donors, to all of you for your generous gifts, for everything you're doing for research. It's hard to donate to something when you don't see results, but you all are lucky. You're seeing results in real time. You're seeing results result in treatment from your donations, and that's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing to be able to do at a time when you're looking to get help yourself, right? So that part of it makes us a little sappy, but we love that portion of it. Again, our contact information, that's not our entire building. We just have portion of a floor on this building, but that's really where we are in Philadelphia. Our private donor team can be reached at email. All three of us get the email at privatedonor@ndiaresource.org. And then we have two phone numbers, an 800 and a local, and option 5 brings you directly to our private donor team. And that's
Wonderful.
everything I had.
That is amazing, Mr. Schott. I'm inspired, and I'm so thankful that you shared this with us today. I learned a lot, so thank you. I have some questions, so at this point, we're going to go ahead and open up the chat box. So feel free to type in your questions there, and I will read them to Mr. Schott. And I'll start with a few questions that were submitted to us in advance of the webinar. And the first one is it possible to donate tissue if I live in Canada? What are the steps I would need to take to make sure it is secured?
Yeah, so tissue donation from Canada is possible. We have imported tissue from Canada before. That's the only country we've ever imported tissue from. We used to work with a tissue bank in Manitoba, and we also do have investigators in Canada. The issue that we have is the timing, right? Investigators need fresh tissue samples really quickly. So donating from Canada might limit the ability to provide fresh tissue for research studies, but you can provide fixed tissues or even frozen tissues, because those provide us with additional time to get samples into the United States for investigators. We also do have an investigator in Canada that studies LAM that you could direct your donation. We could coordinate the donation, fresh tissue samples to them, but not just to investigators in the United States.
So the process for that would be the same as for someone who's living in the United States. It's still a matter of contacting you all, filling out the forms.
Correct.
And then coordinating from there. Okay. There was somebody else who had asked, is it possible to donate tissue from another country outside of the US and Canada? We have LAM patients from all across the world. So is the NDRI really limited to these two countries in essence? What are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, it would be possible, but it would have to be something that we're working on post recovery usually. So it's usually going to be samples that are stored at a hospital that a patient, wants to be released for research. We'd have to look into the individual countries themselves. Each country has different rules. Like Australia, you can't get anything out of Australia, and it's even more difficult to get things in. So it really is dependent on the country, of what our ability would be.
Again, then the idea is this. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that there's also the language barrier, right, of other countries that we might potentially encounter. Even translating authorizations and consent forms to Spanish, there is some loss in translation of certain words, right? So for that purpose, also, like, we have to be careful. We haven't personally done much of the legwork on the front end that we would need to be able to confidently say that, yeah, we can get tissue out of 14 countries. Or, right now I know we've received samples from the UK, we've received samples from Canada, I think that's, and Mexico. Okay. So those are the 3 areas we've received samples from so far and that we've worked with.
So really then at the end of the day, they just need to contact you. Let's have the discussion, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we can actually, we'll go back and, check the feasibility of everything and let you know.
Sure. So I have a question from the chat box, and someone was wondering, could you explain in a little more detail? I think you've got us a little nervous on that potential for loss of identity. So
yeah. So basically, it's basically the same. It's just a declaration to let you know that it is possible, right? It's actually never happened. As long as I've been at NDRI, it's never happened as long as I've known any of the procurement organizations we work with. But it's like signing, when you go to the bank and they have you sign a new form that says that if there's a data breach or something like that, your identity might be lost. For this specific thing, because investigators might put up, part of a genetic code to another investigator to say, hey, this is the code that we're studying to see that this is the gene that switched around. There is the potential that one day where, because individuals are openly now sharing their DNA with groups like Ancestry and 23andMe, that at one point, if those, because I know there's been a data breach at 23andMe, I'm not sure about Ancestry, but because of those breaches, there is a potential that someday maybe some law enforcement will be looking for somebody and they'll be able to connect data, right? Like, that's the worst case example that I can provide is that, that law enforcement is looking at DNA and connect it. There might be an investigator, let's say that, you regularly worked with Dr. Gupta, and he saw, like, he had done your genetic analysis before and he has that in his system, and then he sees another investigator posting it online. They might be able to connect that you are the patient that the investigator was studying the tissue from, right? So that's another example of where there might be a loss of identity if someone is studying LAM or your genes, and somebody else who studied has posted part of that online, and typically when they're posting them online, it's not an open public, they're not allowed to post it as open access. You have to give permission for them to be able to do that. So it's usually going to be protected. There's big programs that we've worked on in the past, like it's called the Genotype Tissue Expression Project. There's a lot of information online from the NIH about that and what was done. And that's really where the NIH first started requesting that this type of declaration be included in consent forms. Right. Well, so that's really where the loss of identity is. That's where that comes from, is really just the fact that because there's so much DNA analysis out there now, right, from corporate organizations, that there is a potential that somebody who might be studying tissue could connect that. Right.
It's interesting you say that, because I do remember at one of my visits to the NIH years ago, we had that exact discussion. Just so there was always that chance that somehow you could be identified. it's an extremely low risk, but I think that's just the nature of the world we live in now, right?
Yeah.
So, and then we have several questions that are surrounded around post-mortem tissue. So can arrangements be made to donate your entire body upon death for research for LAM? You know, what is the
So we have,
viability?
yeah,
Go
so we
ahead.
have worked with postmortem donation in the past. NDRI does do postmortem donation on a regular basis. Um, what LAM investigators are currently looking for, postmortem donation doesn't allow for, with the ability to get tissue in a specific time, right? For cells to be continue to work within media or different things, they have to, you have to keep cells alive for, at most 24 hours before investigators get them. With postmortem tissue recovery, typically recovery doesn't even start until 12 to 15 hours post death. And then you're going through the recovery, so by the time you get the tissue even to the hands of a courier to take to the investigator, you're already at about 20 hours, right? So postmortem tissue is good for pathology, it's good for frozen tissue collection, but for live cell analysis, single cell analysis, and things like that, investigators are really looking for what they call low postmortem or low recovery or preservation interval, right? So how cold can you get the cells as quickly as possible to ensure that they're staying viable for longer for their studies?
And I think that's an important point you make, because that was one thing I didn't understand until I met you and really started digging into this, is that the NDRI is really this middle point between the researchers and the patients. And what the researchers are looking for really dictates then what you all supply to them. And
Right.
that's the piece that we need to understand as patients, that the postmortem, although that's a wonderful thing, to your point, is not something that is really needed right now.
For LAM research, right? NDRI itself is not, just to on another point, we're not a whole body donation program. Whole body donation programs typically will, they'll store a body until they have like a research need for it. Some of it might go for surgical training and things like that. We don't work in that sense. We only provide specific tissues for intended use. Like an intended project. So we have to have somebody assigned to a tissue sample for us to actually go after and recover it. Whole body donations don't work that way. We do work with whole body donations every once in a while, where if somebody wants to donate to us and a whole body donation program, we would be able to go in and collect, in this instance, lung samples or heart or kidney, and then if the whole body donation program doesn't need it, we've done that before. We've worked with them to coordinate that. But we do have a vast postmortem recovery program. If you're interested in donating postmortem tissue outside of LAM, right now we could definitely do that. And who knows, you could sign up and investigators could come back with interest for LAM tissue for postmortem for, let's say, pathology or another type of study. So we are open to that. We just wanted to concentrate on the tissues that we actually have protocols open for right now. But yeah, we provide tissue. Like I said, we have an Alzheimer's program that we've worked with our private donor program. We work with ALS. We do basically common disease donors, diabetes, things like that. That's basically what we're here for. I mean, and I will say, majority of what NDRI places is normal controlled tissue, right? It's controlled tissue for investigator studies where they have patients with the diseases, they just can't get normal tissue, right? So the fact that you have LAM doesn't mean that you can't donate, let's say, skeletal muscle for a study, for a normal control study, right? Because LAM is not affecting that specific tissue, right? Or that we know of at the moment. So there are options to donate for postmortem donation. Just right now, we don't have any avenues for LAM research.
Great. So a couple other questions are kind of centering around, to donate lungs at transplant, do they work with the hospital doing the transplant, and do they need to know ahead of time? And I'm gonna double that with another one. Says that my transplant clinic isn't familiar with NDRI And they're wondering when exactly you pick up lung tissue after it is sent to pathology, what hospital staff members would be helpful to you to get the tissue. So there's some we need to understand a little bit more about your relationship with the hospital, and again, do we need to do this in advance, all that. So
Yeah. Right now, to make sure that we get the tissues out to investigators, especially fresh tissues, as much in advance as possible is appreciated. There are times where we'll have to sign contracts with the hospitals, even talk to their legal department to make sure that we have material transfer agreements in place before we can even get tissue out. So that takes a little bit of time. Um, so as far as in advance you can tell us, the better. If the team doesn't know us, we can always jump on a call with the surgical team. Just 30 minutes to introduce ourselves, talk through the process. Um, as far as working with the transplant team on the day, we don't typically like the transplant team will let us know that, hey, Jane's been called in, she has a transplant, we're going to notify pathology. And usually in hospital systems, not now all of them are not the same. Some hospitals will release the tissue without going to pathology because they already know that it's LAM, it's already been diagnosed, it's already been biopsies done. They might release it without, but majority of them will have to go through the pathology department. Patients, if you want to let your surgical team know that typically it's pathology, they typically do need to talk to their IRB, which is their internal review board, to make sure that they're even allowed to do that. I mentioned Duke earlier. It just always sticks out to me because Duke is it's very hard to get tissue samples out of Duke University Medical Center. So like that's a spot we've tried very hard. We've gone through many meetings with their groups to figure out how to get tissue out, but because they have an internal research need, they don't really allow the release of tissues until all their investigators have had access to it. So that limits when we can get tissue out of Duke. But trying to get all of these things ahead of time, ironed out, would be preferred. We'll have the consent in place, the hospital will have the consent in place, and then we are able to then, screen for the investigators that actually want tissue, and then we'll send the hospital specific supplies for the recovery with instructions on what each investigator needs and how it goes out to them.
so even if the
But
hospital doesn't know about you per se, that this process can still be coordinated.
oh yeah, I mean, like really close relationships with hospitals. We have like University of Washington. We've worked very closely with Columbia University. We've worked very closely with University of Cincinnati. So those, Indiana University in Indianapolis, we've worked very closely. So those are hospitals that, it's easy for us to just know who to contact, where to send the supplies and things like that. But, you could have a transplant anywhere, right, in the country. That's where,
Or a
the,
surgery for that matter,
yeah,
a
yeah.
transplant or just a
The
regular surgery. Yeah.
Right. And
Mhm.
the earlier we know, the better, right? Because then if we are having trouble with the hospital group, there are times where we'll reach out to the LAM Foundation, and LAM Foundation will reach out to, one of their LAM clinic directors. And the
Mhm.
clinic directors will get involved, and all of a sudden it's very easy to get the samples out, right? So the more, information we have on the front end, the more time we have on the front end, the more we can make sure that your donation actually goes to where we need it to go.
Okay. And then are there other tissues? So to this point too, when we're talking about other surgeries, are there other tissues in addition to lungs that are helpful to donate to LAM researchers? And if so, which tissues might those be?
Yeah, so typically LAM investigators are going to look for samples from obviously lung, kidney, um, for like TSC if there's tuberous sclerosis complex in there as well, um, and then hysterectomy, uterus samples. Right, a lot of the studies are showing that it's the uterine cells that are causing the cysts in the lung. Right, that new studies that are showing that. So uterus hysterectomies are very important to investigators too. I know Pauline and Wakita are on. If you guys know, are there, those are the majority of the studies that, or the surgeries that we're typically placing with LAM investigators, correct?
It
They
might be
might
muted.
be.
That's okay. And
But yeah,
then,
that's
yeah.
usually where that's usually the tissue samples that lab investigators are going to look for.
So we've got somebody that is actually having a parathyroidectomy this coming Tuesday. I mean, is that something even that could be considered?
Yeah, I mean, we might not be able to get it fresh out to the investigators, but if you want to reach out to us,
Okay.
we can check with the lab investigators and see if that's a tissue they'd be interested in.
Sure.
You know, obviously, if
And
they're
they,
not interested, then we won't be able to place it with them, but we would try.
right, great. And then do consents for tissue donations expire after a certain amount of time? Do we have to
They do
keep going
not.
back to that? Okay, all right.
They do not, right? So
Mhm.
once, as long as the signature date on the authorization is within the time frame that that authorization was active, that authorization is valid, right? So if you sign an agreement, let's say that you know, I have an agreement with Apple for my iPhone and they come out with a new iPhone, that agreement's slightly different, right? But I signed that last one, it's still going to be valid because I signed it when it was active, even though that agreement no longer exists. So basically, if we update the authorization form, there might be a new designation in there, or there might be a new option in there that, you know, we would then know, hey, that option doesn't exist on this one. We can't place this with this research study, right? Because it's not something that they know about. So in short, yeah, it is it's not too late.
Okay, and that consent form just it lasts. We don't have to keep
Oh
revisiting
yeah.
that.
Yep.
So yeah. Okay. And then kind of the last question here, and I'm not familiar with this, but you might be able to speak to this a little more, is how would somebody decide between giving samples to a for-profit versus an NIH funded research? I'm not familiar with how that would work, but
I mean, so that really depends on the individual themselves, right? So right now, all of the LAM researchers are academics. We don't. I'm almost certain we don't have any corporate LAM researchers right now. We have in the past,
mhm.
but you would just have to let us know that that's something you don't want to do. Because our in when we set up our protocols, you know, our protocols are designated whether or not it's for profit or if it's not for profit or academic, right? So that's how our system lets us know that, hey, if they say no for not for profit, we can't place it with this research, or if they say no for international, these protocols won't even match.
Right.
You know, so that's where we do that on the front end. But yeah, if you let us know, you know, there's also this is more for like directed donations.
Mhm.
We have an NIH investigator who sees patients with calciphylaxis, and he'll send us, you know, every once in a while, he'll have a patient who's undergoing a procedure or a patient who's passed, and he'll call us last minute and try to do recovery. Um, but that, you know, is really where a lot of this is. Sorry, my seat was moving. Um, I lost my train of thought.
I'm directing it for
Oh,
profit
right,
versus
directed
NIH.
donation. So like, yeah, so it's just like specifically, like, let's say you were working with a physician who, you know, you're seeing for knee pain, and they're also an investigator. They do research studies, but they don't have any access, any way to get the tissue to actually look at it, right? So this is something that would be very important to them because they've been following your knee, they've been following the degradation of the cartilage in the knee, and it would be great for them to be able to look at that under a microscope. But how do they get it, right? So that's where we would come in. That's more of a directed donation where we would say, hey, I want to do this, but I really want to place it for um, you know, this investigator.
Sure.
um, for
And
LAM
that
it
can
is
all be directed within the consent form that we fill out, correct?
correct. Yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
great.
technically when you're signing up for the LAM tissue program, you are directing the tissue to LAM studies, because we won't be placing the tissue with any other study. You know, typically outside of a program like this, when somebody comes to our private donor program, we can place a tissue with any one of our 500 active investigators, right? We have investigators studying any and all diseases.
Mhm.
But
If we've
for
given
LAM,
that permission.
this is basically directed to LAM research.
Got it. Well, I so appreciate this. I know we're running out of time and we want to make sure we have some time for our group session, but thank you so much. This was so
Yeah,
informative. It is much bigger and broader than I think most of us have ever dreamed of in terms of what you all are able to do and how we are able to contribute to research. You know, the LAM community is a proactive group. So
very.
this is a tremendous help to us as we navigate our personal journeys and desire to help with research. So thank you for your
Yeah,
time. Yeah,
I will say that my passion to work with your group and to continue to work with your group comes from meeting all of your patients
absolutely.
at the events you guys hold. So,
Absolutely.
you know,
Well, that is
our
simply
passion comes from you guys. So,
well, we appreciate that. And
yeah,
I loved even hearing you showing us the research studies and that you're engaged with us and that it really truly is a collaborative partnership. And so we're very appreciative of that. So wish for you an enjoyment of the rest of the evening. And I know you can't
yes,
hear us, but if everybody would give him a round of applause, we're so
yes.
grateful
Please
for your
reach out to
time.
us at
So
any time. You know, our website, our phone, we're always available.
great. All right.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
Have a good night,
much.
everybody.
Yes, you too.
All right,
Well, at
bye.
this time, bye now. I would like to introduce Lisa Pascal to you all. Lisa joined the LAM Foundation in February of this year as our current Circle of Hope coordinator. She was diagnosed with LAM in 1986 and received a double lung transplant at UCSF in 2014. Having been a volunteer mentor, Lisa is well equipped to continue spreading hope and knowledge, especially in the realm of pre and post transplant experiences. She will be moderating our group session, and she's going to give us some important information real quick about tissue donation and the program itself, and then we will jump into our group discussion. So, Lisa?
Cool. Thank you, Cindy. Yeah, it's wonderful to be part of this LAM Foundation staff. And I'm working in an area that's like, I actually wrote so near and dear to my heart, but I think it's so near and dear to my lungs, is what I'd like to say. But the Circle of Hope transplant program is, or was created in 2018 and is designed to support those of us who are navigating the prospect of lung transplant as a treatment for LAM. The Circle of Hope program offers support for both pre and post transplant patients, and we offer virtual support groups and meetings. We're going to have a little bit of a support group breakout session after this talk, but we also will have some that are just focused on support groups without having a speaker first. Educational webinars like the fabulous one we just had. My mind is blown at how much work NDRI does for us and advancing treatments and cures, he even said, for LAM. It was just amazing. Tissue donation assistance from them and from me with help if you need help with anything along that process, and peer mentoring where we can do some one-on-one meetings of, say, like a pre-transplant person with a post-transplant person to work through this whole process together. And to thank you, in addition to signing up and enrolling in the LAM Foundation, there's actually a separate participation form for the Circle of Hope program. And so if you go to the Circle of Hope website, which at the top you'll see I have, it's at the LAM Foundation, and then you find support, and then you go to patient and family resources, and then the page on the screen will show up. And you can officially join the Circle of Hope program by clicking on that pink button there that says participation form. And then you'll be included in all of the Circle of Hope activities that you choose to be part of. And then in addition, I want to point out that we also, on the Circle of Hope webpage, we have the link there in pinks, kind of in the middle there under contact info. It says the LAM Foundation NDRI. That is also a link to get to the forms to start the consenting process with NDRI. And NDRI, like he said, there's several staff and me, so there's plenty of hopefully resources to help you along the way. And it was just astounding to hear, how about what, 20 years ago, the TSC2 gene was found and its function, which has moved us into discovery of these treatments, rapamycin. And then he was talking about how now, like Dr. Gupta is looking at, well, based on different symptoms, what are different treatments? And all of these things have come from our tissues and will continue. As he said, that in the last 2 or 3 years, such new technologies are coming out. So it's super important that we all can get our tissue donated to help our researchers find these treatments for us in our lifetime and others who come along behind us as well.